All right, now we want to take you to Capitol Hill, a live look for you there, where congressional leaders received a stern warning this morning. The U.S. Budget Office's director says if Congress does not act immediately, aid for Ukraine will run dry by the end of this year. Now, that letter read in part, quote, "There is no magical pot of funding available to meet this moment. We are out of money and nearly out of time." CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is standing by in our D.C. bureau with more on this. Scott, what's the likelihood then of getting more Ukraine aid passed before the end of the year? As the office says, the clock is ticking.
Errol, this is quite a way to start a week. The White House trying to jumpstart or kickstart a stalled engine here in Congress, where they have been stalemated for several weeks and appear to be stalemated for future weeks on what to do about Ukraine funding. In this letter from the Office of Management and Budget, they say it in so many words: Ukraine's going to run out of money. The U.S. will run out of money to support the war effort, and that includes with munitions. That includes with battlefield equipment. And Congress has for weeks debated how to get Ukraine funding passed, and that's where it gets messy. The Republicans in the U.S. Senate and the Republicans in the U.S. House are trying to include U.S. border security policy changes on any bill that funds Ukraine. In fact, the House Speaker says it's got to be the House-passed border security bill on the Ukraine funding to get the money to move. Now, to give you an indication of how much gridlock there is over that House U.S. border immigration policy proposal, the U.S. House Republicans call it a critical way of securing America's border, of stopping a crisis. The Democrats call it the, quote, Child Deportation Act, that it targets victims of domestic violence, political threats, and children. So that's going to take some time to iron out. And what the White House is arguing, Errol, is they don't have time for Ukraine funding. That's the standoff that appears to define the month of December.
And with the end of the week expulsion of George Santos, Republicans in the House now have an even more slim majority. Now, these aid proposals for Ukraine are tied. They're linked to these larger packages, as you mentioned, supporting the border security and Israel. But could this renewed sense of urgency pushed by the OMB prompt a standalone bill, in your view, or is there a better chance of it being approved once it's linked?
The U.S. House Speaker was unambiguous over recent days, saying he wants a separate standalone Ukraine bill. And he faces potentially the heaviest lift here, because there are dozens of House Republicans who do not support future U.S. tax money to Ukraine. They make the argument that other countries should start paying more, that you can't have a blank check go to Ukraine, where there's the potential that some of that money ends up in the wrong place through waste or fraud. But the House Speaker passing the Ukraine bill by itself enters all those little mousetraps and landmines we just discussed, where it doesn't seem like they're going to pass it cleanly. So they're going to need some type of Democratic support. And that gets tricky, because ultimately Republicans and Democrats haven't shown any pathway forward together on this or much of anything else that has an end of the year deadline.
And for everyone, looking at their calendars here for their own personal holiday enjoyment, there are less than 10 days, fewer than 10 days remaining in the legislative session before the winter break. And we've heard about efforts from the GOP to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, President Biden, before the end of the session. Is that something they will try and do in these 10 days as you try to get to some sense of bipartisanship?
Now, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee told Face the Nation that there is time, there is bandwidth to do all of those things, and that this is something that the House Republicans will pursue on different tracks. I would expect the impeachment votes, the impeachment hearings, the impeachment movement to wait till 2024, potentially a few months into 2024. But the to-do list, Errol, for the end of this month and the end of this year is Herculean. Not only is there a pressing need for aid for Ukraine and for Israel and for Taiwan, there are some must-do things Congress has to get to in the next few weeks, including authorizing the military to make sure military bases have what they need here in the States. Also, extending a law called FISA, which allows for intelligence services. Hasn't been a whole lot of progress on getting these things done, and the clock is ticking loudly with 2 weeks left of legislative time for the House and the Senate.
Yikes. All right, Scott, we appreciate the update. Thank you.